Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast, brought to you by Women in ETFs. This is Christine Delano, and I'm thrilled you've joined us. If you're pursuing excellence in your own career or intrigued by the hustle required to make it to the top, this podcast is for you. This is season 6, and we are dropping in on leaders across the globe. We're going to learn how to balance, how to speak truth to power, and how to have fun doing it. So put aside that massive to-do list and let's get inspired. Hey listeners, so glad you've joined me. Today we're talking communication. And if you've ever wondered why that email you sent didn't land right, or as you're reading something that's coming across your desk and you're thinking, was this for me? What is it that they want me to do with this information? That's what we're talking about today. How do we have a clarity of voice? How do we infuse empathy, and why these things are so critical in an environment that is increasingly noisy? So thanks for coming along, and we'll get right to it. Today, I'm joined by Gayathiri Sri Rangan. Gayathiri is a business development executive at Index One with extensive experience in driving business growth, expanding global presence, and strengthening marketing efforts. She previously served as co-head of marketing at Women in ETFs EMEA, and now contributes as one of the global co-heads of communications for Women in ETFs. She is Sri Lankan by heritage, raised in Indonesia, and currently lives in Liverpool in the United Kingdom. She is passionate about singing and creating music. Welcome to the We Talk Careers podcast.
Thanks, Christine. It's lovely to be here.
Well, I read in your bio that you are a ballet dancer, so you're going to have to tell me about that. I'm going to have to put you on the spot.
So I am a beginner ballet dancer. I started maybe like 2 years ago. I've always wanted to do ballet as a kid, but I thought, I'm an adult now. Let me spend my money wisely. So I've decided to go to a ballet class, and I'm basically just living my dreams. And I'm not very good. I'm still a beginner, but hopefully I stay on track and get better as I go. But yeah.
I never took ballet. I think I was just too awkward. And I remember this one time, like I had just, sort of started my career super young. And I was like walking across the bar at like a work event, and I tripped and fell, didn't fall all the way down, but I like caught myself and this guy next to me was like, wow, were you a ballet dancer? And I'm thinking, that was the most awkward fall I've ever taken, and in front of like people in suits. And I'm like, that is like such a pathetic come on, because I know what I look like, and it didn't look like anything like a ballet dancer.
I love that. I wonder what he was thinking.
I know. I was like trying to be nice to me or something, trying to tell me that I did that elegantly. I'm like, no, I know myself. I had scabbed knees my entire growing up. Like,
I actually have a very similar story where I just tripped and fell on like gravel, and I have no idea to this day what I tripped on, and just scraped my arm. But yeah, I probably wasn't as elegant looking as well when I fell.
Well, speaking of tripping on gravel, so we had one of my best friends, Nicole Gates, on a podcast for a number of episodes co-hosting with me, and she's incredible. And I remember when we first moved to Maine, and it was my birthday, which is actually this weekend as well, so it's coming right up, but she was bringing over a like homemade carrot cake. It was so gorgeous, but our driveway was still gravel at that point, and she walked out of the car and like it just plopped on the gravel, like this beautiful cake, just the whole thing over. And I go running out, and I'm like, I don't care. We're scraping it up. We're eating it up. I don't know if you watch Friends, but there's like an episode of them eating cheesecake off the floor. But I was just like, I don't care. Gravel, whatever. I'm eating that carrot cake. So,
it's carrot cake. You just have to.
You have to. It's a homemade,
Right.
like, oh my goodness, cream cheese frosting. Absolutely.
Oh, love it.
Well, I'm excited to have you on the show today. I think it's been fun to get to know you in your role, and to really understand a lot about sort of the importance and the nuance of communication. Because I think, as our listeners, think back, we always have these opportunities where we're walking away from conversations and you're thinking, did they really hear me? Did I really even say the right things? What were those words that I used? Why did I keep talking? Why did I stop talking? Communication, it's such a powerful tool, but we often take it for granted. We often don't sit and really think about not only the words, but all the things that go into communicating. And I think that if we're going to unpack communication, it can really be career changing for people as we talk about it today. So tell me how you define communication, G.
Perfect. So, yeah, going off of everything that you said, communication is how we get our point across. It's something that we do every single day. We're doing it right now, whether it's through talking or listening or just even being present. But like you said, oftentimes people think communication is just about the words and the messaging, but it's a lot more layered than that. And it's important to consider those nuances when we're entering spaces where communication can literally be the fine line between connecting with someone and it leading to misunderstandings.
Mm.
So, the reason that I thought this topic made a lot of sense to discuss today is because communication is so much more dynamic than we think. It's not just about the words and messaging, but it's more about how we relate to people, how we adapt to our audience, and how we understand them. So, hopefully, this conversation sheds some light around those nuances and provide a broader perspective on what communication really is and what it can look like on a day-to-day basis.
I remember when I was young in my career, I remember sitting in these, rooms with lots of suits. There would be a reason why I'd need to be there. So they'd invited me sometimes to listen, but sometimes to just share a perspective. I had a sort of a neuroscience and engineering background in the world of finance. I often had a perspective I could share. But instead of listening, I spent a lot of time sort of like wordsmithing in my head, like trying to make sure that everything coming out of my mouth would be like clever and interesting and use the right vocabulary. I realize now, too late for my younger self, that clarity always beats cleverness. The idea that you can actually get people to not only understand what you're saying, but move in the direction that you need to with what you're communicating, so much more important than sounding smart or using big words or understanding the jargon. It took me a while to realize that. And I think it was a lot of just feeling uncomfortable or insecure in how much I knew compared to everyone else in the room.
I couldn't relate more. Like if in this industry and even in the leadership roles that I've recently took on, I feel I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but maybe it is a kind of imposter syndrome where you feel like you have so much to say, but you're so obsessed with the words that you're using and how it sounds rather than actually trying to relate to the people that you're speaking to. So yeah, I fully get what you're saying there. And I'm working every day to focus more on what I say and how I say it more than the little things like vocabulary and even little things like inflections and intonations. I think they are important, but definitely not more important than making a conscious effort to relate to your audience.
I think about with Women in ETFs, an organization that's been around for now more than a decade, communication couldn't be more important now. With the number of members we have, it used to be, when I first started, I had a spreadsheet of like 20 names. and and I didn't even know all of them then, but very quickly could and did know everybody who was involved. And co-heading membership, I would call every single person who joined. And it was a wonderful way to connect and communicate. That is impossible now. So tell us a little bit about what your journey has been within these roles in Women in ETFs, how maybe listeners can take from it some learnings that you've had.
Yeah, so my journey with women in ETFs started in the EMEA region. I've been following women in ETFs for a while, so I joined as a co-head of marketing for the EMEA region. And in my early roles, working with the marketing and communications content within these regions, we would work on materials across countries like Poland, Spain, France, Germany, and of course the United Kingdom. And it was such an amazing opportunity because I quickly realized that communication looks quite different across these different cultures. And so, even though the message that we're all trying to say and deliver is the same, the way that we do so definitely differed. So it could be small things like date formats, word choices, to more bigger, considerable things like tone of voice, design preferences. They all varied across regions. And so those differences taught me that effective communication is not just about uniformity. Of course, we want a level of consistency and standardization, but it's not always just about that. It's about adaptation. It's about relating to these different regions. And so today in my global role, I am applying these lessons to develop unified communications across 34 plus chapters. We have a branding and marketing guidelines and standards, but we're also ensuring that we honor and preserve the cultural nuances that make each region's messaging unique. So at Women in ETFs, we are committed to promoting diversity, and so I believe that our communication should reflect that. It's been such a great journey working, in the EMEA region and now applying all of those lessons on a global scale, and just having the opportunity to also work with different people from different cultures has been so amazing. And every day I'm learning different things about the way that people communicate amongst themselves, internationally, of course, and applying those really practical nuances and knowledge to our communication processes and materials is really important, to the organization. So having that experience kind of equips me to being able to kind of carry out my responsibilities in the global role.
I think about how important this contextualization of information globally is.
Yeah,
The message can be consistent, but the way in which it's interpreted or in the way in which we need to describe it and explain it can be really regionally specific. I don't have experience doing that, but as a fiction writer, I think about that all the time in my sentences. So, for example, instead of trying to get all the information out, like trying to explain the whole backstory of a marriage and, why she's concerned about him or doubting him or whatever, instead, he walks into the room and he's wearing a shirt she's never seen. And you can kind of leave it at that with the fact that she knows everything in his closet, but that shirt is new. And just these little things that you can drop that contextualize a message becomes really fun. But it also requires, for me, it requires that I know the absolute backstory on every one of my characters. For you, it requires that you actually know what's going on in Poland, or what's going on in
right.
Paris, and and then having to bring those folks into the conversation as well, so that you can provide that contextualization.
Right, exactly. And that's what we're focused on. We can continue to work on consistency, and that is so important for a global organization like ours. But it is also really important to preserve those differences between regions, and representing those as a global organization is really what makes us the type of organization to promote diversity and inclusion, which is part of
Mm-hmm.
mission and vision. So yeah, I do really believe that our communication should reflect that we are proud to represent all these different regions and support them in their local initiatives, which I'm just really proud and excited to, be a part of.
So, what practical steps do you have for our listeners when you think about communication? I mean, you get to think about it on a global footprint, but as we said earlier, this is such a key to successful careers, is the ability to communicate with clarity. What are some advice or practical steps that you might have for folks?
So, from my personal and professional experiences so far, I will say that the very first step that anyone should take in any situation is to understand the context and the background. And it sounds obvious, but we often overlook it because we're trying to communicate information so quickly, and we just forget to outline what that context is. So, who are you speaking to? Where are they coming from? Why is this conversation or this communication channel present? So, I think the very first thing is understand the context and background. And then from there, the next step should not just be to communicate, but to relate to your audience. So, communication, again, it's not just about transferring information, it's about connecting and relating. So don't just seek to communicate, seek to connect with your audience whilst achieving the objective of transferring that information from one to another. And I will say the third step, which I personally have learned or maybe relearned recently, is how you say something matters just as much, if not more, than what you say. So you can have the most important piece of information ever, but if you're not delivering that in the way that makes sense to your audience, it's really not going to stick. They might hear you, but they're not going to understand or, relate to why that's relevant to them and what they do. So, being able to understand that from person to person is very important. And then obviously in the context of women in ETFs, communicating to different regions, how you say it to them, what makes sense to them is probably one of the top priorities when it comes to communicating. So how you say something matters just as much, if not more, than what you have to say.
I think about friends of mine that write in lots of different time periods. So thinking back to before the printing press and before maybe even all the way back to ancient Rome, let's go there, and how getting information was in itself an effort, right? So just hearing from somebody meant that somebody actually figured out a way to get a correspondence to you, or they have traveled a long distance to convey this piece of information to you. And it seemed we have learned as a society how important the information is. Now we're in such a noisy environment. There is just so
Yeah.
many. Everyone wants to get their message out. Everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame. Everybody has something that they want to say, or a TikTok video to share, or whatever the
Yeah.
case may be. That is really something I'd love to kind of double down on a little bit. How is it that we, carve out a space for us in an environment that is like ready to look past us all the time?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to understanding your client, your segments, let's say. So in marketing, segmentation is super important, right? Understanding your audience, what they need, and then crafting messages to appeal to those segmentations and their specific needs. You're absolutely right. There are so many avenues today to share information, and then everybody's trying to capitalize on all of these avenues at the same time that sometimes your message can just get lost. Like, do we really need to maybe post some like financial marketing material on TikTok, where maybe that's not where our audience lies? Maybe if we wanted to do a cute little song about the ETF industry on TikTok, that might fare well. But most of the time, we use more traditional methods like LinkedIn, for example, even though that's technically not traditional, and our websites, for example. But I think in the same way, we just have to accept there is going to be a lot of noise. And as much as we want to break through that noise, I think it's more important to stay authentic to who you are while also adapting to the people that you are appealing to. And in that process, it's just the most important thing to understand truly what their needs are. Don't try to sell them what they don't want, basically, what they're not going to buy. Regardless of the noise, there is always going to be an opportunity to relate to people. And it's just a matter of understanding them more than others, I will say, because people often find, well, I often find that people think that they've got it all figured out, like we've got a great marketing strategy, we know exactly who we're going to market to, but that's the research goes as far as that. So I think there's always going to be an opportunity to really understand who you're talking to, what they really need, and then crafting a very bespoke strategy or communication method to get through to them.
So digging into that, if you think about that TikTok video that's a song about ETFs, putting it out there, it could be something unique that gets a lot of views or a lot of likes, but is it even to your purpose? That's the piece that you're talking about too, because there's a conversion, right? There's the idea that even if your message gets out, you're actually not moving them in the direction that you need them to move. So what is
Right.
it that you want people to do with the information that you that you're putting out there? Is it educational only? Is it the idea that we're trying to overcome a stigma or overcome a irrelevance so that people are more familiar with the concept? Is it actually a sale?
Yeah.
That idea of starting very basic with who is it that you're going after and what is it that you want them to do with the information, extremely important.
Yeah.
Do you have a lesson learned for us? Have you learned something over, the course of your career here in sort of communication and marketing that you think might be valuable for our listeners?
Yes. And, I'm definitely the type of person to be honest about like mistakes and things that I've learned because it's a valuable opportunity to share it with other people. So I'm actually quite excited about this. Recently, I was told that I could bring more empathy and clarity into my communication. And, up until this point, I think most of the time I do try and apply empathy in my communication. But I realized that when you're so focused on getting things done and meeting deadlines and just making sure that all your ducks are in a row, it's so easy to overlook whether other people around you are on the same page as you. And when people are not on the same page as you, the communication just breaks down even further down the line, and you don't want that. As I'm growing into this leadership role at Women in ETFs and in my day job and just in my day-to-day life, I'm making a really conscious effort to improve in that area and just make a conscious effort to include empathy and clarity in everything that I'm saying. And also going back to your previous point, the why, like why you're saying something is just as important as how you're saying it and who you're saying it to. And that also kind of helps you frame your communication strategy to include more empathy. Because at the end of the day, when you're relating to people, it's empathy that you're tapping into. So yeah, that's one thing that I learned is that just because you have a message doesn't mean that it's going to land the way that you intended it. So it's important to really take your time to understand and consider your audience's sentiments, needs, and the overall context to make sure that your message is not only heard, but understood and absorbed by your audience.
I think about that with emails. Emails are not neutral. And
Yeah,
as much as we want them sometimes to be, where it's just like, I just need to convey this information. If you could just have this information and then give me back this information. But because they lack tone or any body language or anything else that we can kind of hand wave around with, I think they're really easy to misinterpret. So
yeah,
I think it's quite important that we add warmth to what it is that we're saying. And if that's, as you said, sort of like the more the personal connection or sort of something that speaks of the empathy that we have for the person on the other end receiving, all these pieces of communication, that's something that is important to me because I
yeah,
feel that in so many cases, so many of the people that I communicate with, I don't get to sit over a cup of coffee and, see eye to eye with them. It's often virtual or it's completely electronic in communication.
yeah.
So taking those moments to be overly concerned about relationship that you have with people is, I think, really important.
100%. And you mentioned emails, and I just find that so funny because there's this classic argument of whether you can use exclamation marks in emails. But I just think it's a nice thing to do, you know? It doesn't make your email sound too mad if you just use full stops. But I don't know, maybe that's just like a generational thing because
Oh, it's
full stops just sound scary.
everything is a generational thing. I was just talking to my son about the fact that he hates when I use punctuation in my texts. When there's more than one sentence, mom, he's like, you don't have to put a period at the end of it. I'm like, I don't know so I have honestly tried now. I was just telling him this the other night. I'm like, have you noticed? I've been really trying to get better about,
Oh,
communicating the way that shows that I'm like listening to him. And I mean, not that he
Right.
really cares. He's a great kid, but it's fun to learn these things. So I'm like, I'm interested. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to try to write that sentence without putting a period at the end. Honestly, most of the time
Right.
I have to delete it because it just automatically ends in a period. I'm like, there's something wrong with my
Right.
phone. I don't know. It likes punctuation.
No, and that's really funny. I've heard that a lot from, different age groups. The way that they message people over text is there's such variance in the way that you and I probably message as well.
Right.
So yeah, I love it though. I love the differences.
It
It makes us
is.
who we
It
are.
is really fun when you think about how people message differently and knowing that, I've got some friends that just drop in out of the blue with like a very specific question. And I'm like, well, hello, good morning, and I'm always sort of funny about that. Like one thing that my daughter did on my husband's text years ago was she put a red heart past my name. So it says Christine Red Heart. So every time I text him, he sees my name with a red heart. And so it's like this little love filter. So I
Oh,
feel
that's
like I
cute.
get this like of an edge up on everything I say to him because he takes it with the idea of like, yes, it comes from a place of love. So I've given this
Right.
recommendation to a number of friends. I'm like, just go into your husband and like put a little heart next to your name. So that when he gets text from you, he always sees the heart.
Just a little bit of subliminal messaging. I love
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. Exactly. How about folks that are sort of new into marketing, maybe new into communication, even in roles outside of marketing at all? What advice would you have for them in better communicating with their teams, with their bosses, with the folks that they need to work with, their clients?
Yeah, so, just for some context, I was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in Indonesia. I learned Mandarin as a second language. I'm learning French. So I've kind of involved myself with so many different cultures that I've realized how important it is to speak to as many people as you can. Speak to everyone and anyone from anywhere because you'll kind of expand your perspectives. And the more people and cultures that you interact with, your perspectives will just grow and you'll expose yourself. When you expose yourself to these perspectives, you will gain more empathy and you will become a better communicator. And I think if you can communicate with anyone, it just makes you a better human being
Mm.
because you can relate to literally anybody. So I think not just professionally, but in any situation in life, if you have the ability, if you're equipped with the skill to relate and communicate with anyone, I think you do go far in life and a lot of opportunities will open for you. So I will say that a really solid advice is to talk to as many people as you can. Just open yourself up to different perspectives and different stories. And I think naturally you will be more confident and equipped with the right skills to be a better communicator.
Excellent advice. And then I would add to it those that become sort of regular people that you communicate with, understand their preferred method of communication. I feel like we
Yeah.
sometimes default to the things that are most helpful to us. I had an experience with this just yesterday where we were having some issues in my family with some sickness. And so a friend who's a nurse was reaching out to me to say, hey, what's going on? And so I gave her like really high level, but then said something like, and it's just too much to get into over text, but we can talk about it. And then her next text back to me was like asking me the details of it. And I'm like, I just told you, like, I don't want, first of all, I don't even really want to even get into it right now. I don't really want to type it all out. I don't,
Right.
I just, at some point, like, we'll get a cup of coffee and we can talk about, how difficult some, illnesses are and how hard it is on the family. So I felt like, and then she actually just dropped in later yesterday, which was so sweet. And she's like, after I asked you, I felt bad because I reread and I knew I should, ask you in person. And we don't always do that. We don't always ask for what we want, and people don't always receive it. She ended up receiving it. We had a great conversation. But I think in general, the idea of talking to as many people as you can and then recognizing those people that you do need to be in regular communication with, what is their preferred? Do they just want you to pick up the phone and give them a call? Is a call intrusive? Would they prefer the email? Do they, enjoy texting? should you on a regular basis just be getting a 15-minute drop-in in their office, talking it through? And I think there's nothing wrong with being overt about those decisions and direct those questions to them as to what they prefer.
Right, 100%. And it's about setting boundaries as well in a way, right? Because your preferred method of communication might not suit another person, but if there's no communication about communication styles, that's not really going to work out. So, yeah, fully agree with you. I think that also comes down to, again, being empathetic about the people that you speak to and, applying that in your communication approach with them.
Well, I really hope that everyone's listening is just excited to think about their next conversation and their next ways in which they can become a better communicator. I really appreciate you coming on the show to talk about that. And then my last question, because we all know how much I love fiction, is to tell me if you are reading a book right now, and I'm going to put you on the spot with it, but is there anything that you might recommend to our listeners?
Right. So I haven't been reading as much lately, but I did pick up. It's funny because you're writing a thriller book. I'm so into psychological thrillers. So I picked up The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, which I haven't finished reading, but I hope to soon. And then this weekend, it's so me to just pick up a book and then pick up another book. This weekend, I picked up The Quiet Tenant by Clémence Michelon. I think that's how you say his name. Both psychological thrillers. The first chapter got me hooked, so I might finish the second book first and then go back to The Silent Patient. But that being said, I am excited about your book, Christine, which is coming out Jan next year.
That's right, January. That's right.
Right.
That's right. A little bit of time.
And
it takes a while
exactly.
in this industry, in the publishing industry, to get anything done, but it's next January.
No, I'm so excited because you're writing a thriller and then it's also related to our industry.
Yes.
So I can't wait to see how those two worlds blend. It's literally my life, so I can't wait to read it.
I think it's kind of the first of its kind. So opening up, hopefully we'll get more, because I think the idea of like sort of Wall Street, fund management, ETFs, all of that really lends itself to really cool thrillers. So I hope more people pick up on it. But yeah, I'm super excited to see my book in the world. But The Silent Patient, I will also say that my son and I and my daughter, we all read that book over the last couple of years, and such a good book. So when you're done, you have to reach out to me and we'll have a little mini book club, because the way that the book is written, I like structures of stories, and it's probably like structures of communications too. Like structures can lend itself to being making a communication successful. And that book was one of those cases. The way that it's structured actually lent to the story itself. So, and I think that's just really cool.
Yeah, no, I have to get through that book. I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if you've read The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jules.
Yes.
I love that book so much. One of my most favorite thriller books.
Nice. Yes, I might even have it. I would have to look, but I have a number of her books on my bookshelf. So
yeah, I think I've read like 2 books so far. I've got more of her books that I haven't read, but yeah, definitely Silent Patient. I think I'm quite late to the trend, but I'm looking forward to finishing.
Well, and I think there's a music element in The Silent Patient too. So, and I know that's yeah. So we'll have to talk about it. Well,
yes, definitely.
Thank you, G, so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your perspective and taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Christine. It's been a lovely chat. And yeah, just thank you for considering me for this episode. And I hope that our conversation has helped someone out there. And if not, at least we had a great chat. So
absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, our listeners, for spending your time with us. I hope this is not just information, but you let it be transformational in how you think about your career. I'm rooting for you. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a rating and a review. Your ratings and reviews tell Apple that this is a podcast worth listening to. And in turn, your reviews will help We Talk Careers get in front of more listeners looking to succeed, just like you. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that follow button, because there's going to be another brand new episode and you don't want to miss it. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you for listening.